Eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? Story 1. This happened when I was 13. No one in my family will acknowledge it, and the only ones who might have, my great-grandfather included, have unfortunately passed away. No one will give me the time of day about it. My family has a cabin in Cook's Forest, Clarion, Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather built it and made small expansions over the years. It sits in a cozy little nook at the end of a long dirt road, off the main road, and down a hill. A few other properties are around, but most are farther up the dirt road. Only one sits partway down the hill. The cabin is far from modern. No internet, no cell service, and the television still has dials you twist to watch a DVD. It's very rustic, and I love it. The property halfway down the hill is visible from the front of our cabin, where the kitchen window, porch, parking area, and fire pit are. For as long as anyone can remember, it has been an abandoned lot with the remains of a cabin and a concrete basement. Because it was built on a hill, half the basement jutted out, while the rest crumbled. It sits at the fork we would take on our ATVs to reach the fire break. Even though it could have been creepy, it was a familiar and common sight. Until one Memorial Day, which is when we opened the cabin after winter. A large part of our family would go to the cabin for the long weekend to spend time together. Everyone would usually arrive by early evening, and then we would all gather for my great-granddad's dinosaur pancakes for breakfast, the highlight of my single-digit to preteen years. That morning, I woke up expecting the smell of pancakes and the chatter of the older members of my family downstairs, but there was nothing. I assumed I had gotten up too early, so I went downstairs to use the bathroom and planned to go back to sleep. Looking back, the whole upstairs was just mattresses with an aisle between them. I should have noticed that most of the beds were empty. When I got downstairs, I saw all the adults outside. I went out to say good morning and demand my T-Rex pancakes. Instead, I found my family, adults standing in a semicircle facing an older man and a woman I didn't recognize. I assumed it was some adult situation, so I went back inside to wake my cousins, but not before glancing at the microwave clock. It was about 3 in the afternoon. I loved the cabin. I would doodle it, the four-wheelers and the surrounding area for months leading up to Memorial Day weekend. I was usually up at the crack of dawn, too excited to sleep in. Sleeping until 3 in the afternoon was not normal in any way. I woke my cousins, and by the time they all moseyed downstairs, the adults were back inside. Everyone was mostly silent, but then Great-Grandpa fired up the stove and got us kids excited for dino cakes, so for a moment everything seemed normal. I was there with one of my aunts and my uncle. No parents. My aunt, who was close in age to me and definitely the cool aunt, looked pale as a sheet. I went to ask what was wrong. She took me outside and pointed at the abandoned, crumbling property. In its place was a sprawling cabin mansion, with a parking area full of SUVs and the coolest four-wheelers my 13-year-old self had ever seen. My aunt explained that the owners, the couple I had seen earlier, had come to say hi and invited us over to hang out with their nieces and nephews as they were having a Memorial Day get-together just like ours. I, thinking only about the awesome four-wheelers, almost ran to the house, but my aunt caught me and forcefully reminded me of my dino cakes. I conceded and ran back inside, to an atmosphere so thick with tension that even my undeveloped brain, thanks to Dr. Mom, could sense it. The oldest adults were acting normal and playing with us kids, but something felt very off. Finally, I asked, "What the heck is up?" My aunt bonked me on the head and asked if I had seen that massive cabin mansion last night, last year, or the year before. We had come to the cabin every few weeks until December. Did I see any construction? Well, no, but I didn't care because they invited us over and they had cool four-wheelers. Aunt Beth, come on! A resounding no from multiple family members made my emotional 13-year-old self almost flee in tears until my grandpa, a 6'7" hulk of a man, crouched down to my level and explained that he felt something was off. He said the couple didn't act right. I assumed he meant they were rude and that we should just keep to ourselves for the weekend. I agreed, and we went about our day with all the adults keeping us busy with activities inside or behind the cabin. That night, as we got ready for bed, I saw my great-granddad, a World War II vet, who had the only bedroom on the first floor, loading 3 shotguns. He handed one to my grandpa and the other to my uncle, my cool aunt's husband. To my shock and awe, my aunt pulled a bedazzled Glock from her purse. I went to bed picturing my tiny aunt taking down a bunch of bad guys with her shiny pistol. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of adults chatting downstairs. I was sad because today was the day we had to pack and leave, but everything seemed back to normal, so I felt relieved. I ran downstairs, noted the clock said 7:30, but ignored the oddness and dug into a plate of dino cakes while asking my aunt what time we had to leave. Leave? We don't leave until tomorrow. Wait, what day is it? It's Saturday. We just got here last night. I noticed just a flicker of doubt in my aunt's eyes, so I knew something was up, and I ran outside. The abandoned lot had returned to its decrepit state. I decided to brush it off, enjoy my ATV riding, and quickly forgot about everything. It wasn't until I got back to school that I was called to the main office. They asked why I hadn't been at school on Monday. I told them today was Monday. What were they talking about? Nope, it was Tuesday, and my absence was unexplained despite several calls. I skipped school frequently, sure, but my parents divorced were neither at the cabin nor in on anything. So either my family pulled the trick of all tricks on me, or I'm living in an alternate universe where sleeping into the afternoon is normal. Like I said, no one will even remotely entertain a conversation about this incident, so I'm left telling my fellow Redditors about my family's conspiracy against me. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Next story. One is about when I worked at Disney World and somehow got into an abandoned attraction that hasn't been addressed since it closed, but I'm not sure how interesting that is to non-Disney fans, so I'll tell the other one. In the summer of 2014, I was lucky enough to study in Paris, France. One of my classes was the History of Science in Paris. Our class consisted of 3 other students and the professor. Our very first excursion was to La Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, the Museum of Science and Industry. It was a very busy time on the metro, so we weren't all together on the train, but the professor had told us which stop we would need to transfer to another line. Everything was fine until we got to the stop. The 2 other students my age and I got off the train, turned around and saw the professor and the older student still sitting in the car, just in time for the doors to close and the train to leave. It turned out the professor had given us the wrong stop, realized it while en route, and assumed we wouldn't get off until he did. So we had no idea where we were or where we were going, no operational phones, and no way to ask for help. Yes, I know many French people speak enough English that we could have asked, but Parisian locals can be intimidating to newly arrived students. The metro map isn't hard to read once you've been using it for a week or two. But on that first weekend, it looked like someone had thrown rainbow spaghetti across a map. In any case, we eventually figured out which direction to go. Feeling quite proud of ourselves, we set off. Our first transfer was onto a far less busy train that serviced mostly small, rarely used stations. The next stop we got off at was different. There is a lot of old charm in Paris, and everything ages beautifully, crumbling stone and weathered brickwork, rather than rotting houses or busted-out storefronts. I was probably caught up in the magic of the historic city, so my brain ignored minor construction and everyday metropolitan grime. But when we stepped into the corridor, its state was jarring. Firstly, we were the only ones to get off the train, and everyone on the platform got on, leaving us completely alone. Much like in any big city, there aren't many opportunities to be alone in public in Paris, especially in the middle of the day. The silence was bizarre. There were no other people, no homeless folks crouched on the floor, likely because it wasn't a busy enough station to make money from passers-by, and the trains were spaced far apart. It was nearly silent, which is rare in a big city. The tiles on the walls were cracked and covered in graffiti from unskilled artists. Water dripped from somewhere in the ceiling, forming puddles on the floor. Instead of the usual fluorescent lighting of other stations, the corridor was lit by exposed hanging bulbs, dim, yellow, and humming, just loud enough to make your ears twitch. They were spaced far enough apart to leave fairly dark patches in between, and thanks to the breeze, the bulbs swung slowly back and forth. The tunnel curved, so we couldn't see how long it stretched, We were creeped out, but we talked loudly to compensate for the silence, joking as we speed-walked toward the end. We expected to reach the lobby area that would lead to other platforms or stairs up to street level, where we could find the entrance to the other platforms. But no, we turned the corner and found another corridor. This one was barely a corridor, more like a tunnel. The walls weren't walls at all, but big tarps, the kind used to contain dust in a construction area. They were translucent enough to reveal yawning darkness beyond. Still, not a soul, no other passengers, employees, or beggars, just the three of us, now silent, inching closer together as our hackles rose. Our steps and the mysterious dripping echoed in the cavernous space. The lights were even more sparse here, and several had burnt out. Again, the tunnel curved, and it was even longer than the first. When we glimpsed the end, we nearly jogged, hoping the area beyond would be better lit and lead to the lobby. But no, another desolate tunnel stretched before us. This one had flickering fluorescent lights that audibly buzzed, stark concrete walls, and still not a soul in sight. By now, we were far from the platform and no longer walled in by flimsy tarps. The silence felt claustrophobic. Every step and every breath seemed amplified, and our voices bounced aggressively back at us, so we stopped talking. We had been walking for what felt like an hour, though it was closer to 20 minutes, before we finally reached the stairs up to the street. None of us could figure out how so much tunnel could fit under the city, but none of us were willing to go back down there to catch the next train. We ended up walking to the next stop on the line we needed. Thankfully, it was a regular, loud, packed, busy metro station. We finally managed to meet up with our professor, who promptly made fun of us for getting off at the wrong stop in the first place. Next story. Not creepy, exactly, but something I have never been able to explain. I have been an avid horsewoman my entire life. The barn I grew up riding at was in a rural area, situated on a few hundred acres of undeveloped land. The family that owned the farm owned just over 100 of those acres, and most of the rest of the area was available for us to ride on. A few other farms bordered the land with scattered growing fields, but for the most part it was woods with well-worn trails throughout. I spent a lot of time out in those woods and saw a whole lot of nature happen there. It was as close to perfect solitude as you can get in western New York. In my late teens, I had a horse who was a pretty remarkable guy, but I had put him up for sale. I felt ready for a more challenging animal and could not afford 2 horses. I felt guilty, as he was very special, but I believed I was doing the right thing for my riding career. One lazy summer morning, I packed a lunch and headed out for a long, meandering ride in the woods. This was commonplace for me. I knew the woods very well, but they were dense, and there were always new areas to explore. I wasn't feeling ambitious that day and intended to head to a man-made pond near one of the border farms, have lunch, read for a bit, and then return. We hit the main trail and headed toward the pond. But about halfway there, I decided to take an alternate route along a tree-lined ridge that turned off the main trail. I have no idea what happened when I turned onto that cutoff, but the woods I entered were not my woods. They weren't creepy or overtly wrong, but they were different. I was immediately disoriented. Nothing looked familiar, and I couldn't pick out any landmarks or trails. I was weirded out enough to turn around and head back to the main trail, but the trail had vanished. I couldn't have been more than 30 yards from it, yet I could not find it or any way back. We traveled in that direction far longer than we had on the main trail, and I finally gave up, letting my horse take control, trusting he'd find his way home. He immediately took a hard left, which should have taken us parallel to the main trail, heading in the general direction of home. About 10 minutes later, he led us into a clearing. It was a meadow with a perfect serene pond in the middle. The grass was short and tidy, as if it had been mown recently, but there were no obvious paths for any mower to get in or out. The pond was unusually clear. Most small bodies of water in the area were swampy, but this one was clean and smelled fresh. The wildflowers around it were unlike any I had seen before. I assumed it was some farmer's personal zen spot and didn't think much of it. I hopped off, let my horse graze, ate my lunch, read for a bit, and enjoyed a gorgeous afternoon watching dragonflies and frogs. It was a storybook setting, and I remember thinking how strange it was that no one from the barn had ever mentioned this incredibly beautiful place so close to home. A couple of hours later, I packed up and remounted, heading back the way we had come in. When I had first turned off the main trail and gotten lost, I hadn't gone more than 30 or so yards into the woods, yet I had struggled to find the trail again. As we left the clearing and re-entered the woods, I immediately felt at home, and my internal compass led me straight to the main trail, about 30 yards back the way I had originally come in. It didn't make much sense that the trail was still that distance away after what felt like a mile of wandering, but I chalked it up to daydreaming and having meandered off course. We got back to the barn with no issues, and I headed home that night feeling grateful for a wonderful, peaceful afternoon with my equine friend, knowing he would soon be going to a new home. The next day, I mentioned the meadow and pond to the barn owner, and she looked a little confused. Her family had been there for generations, and she told me she didn't recall any such area near the barn, nor had she ever heard anyone else mention it. I insisted she had to see it, so we tacked up and headed out. We couldn't find it. Not that day, and never since. The owner shrugged me off, but I had spent 6 hours out there somewhere, and the place couldn't have been more than 30 yards from the main trail, near a well-used cutoff to another popular trail. I made it my mission to find it, spending the next 2 weeks scouring the area. In the 20 years since, I have never been able to locate it. I have even pored over satellite images. Nothing. As far as I can tell, it doesn't exist. When we turned off the main trail that day, we went somewhere else entirely. Epilogue. My horse died suddenly a couple of weeks later, a day after literally saving my life while we were out on the trail looking for that impossible meadow. No joke, I have no explanation for that meadow, but I don't think I'll ever get to go back. I know how ridiculous this sounds, but I honestly think it was his place and he was sharing it with me before he left for good. I'm not usually prone to flights of fancy, but I know what I saw and felt, and I know that place no longer exists in any way I can find. Next story. The Aliens of Normal, Illinois. I was on my way from my sweet home in Alabama to a canoe base in Minnesota for the summer, northern tier for any Boy Scouts or venturing scouts out there. To staff there, you had to complete a special physical and be approved by the BSA. I was driving up I-65 in Illinois when I got the news that I had done the wrong physical. After receiving the email at a gas station off the interstate, I thought, damn, wouldn't it be nice if there just happened to be an urgent care nearby that I could get this done at before they close today? I pulled off the interstate, saw signs for a town called Normal, figured I'd grab a late lunch and turned a corner. Bam! A doc in a box, urgent care right there. The receptionist actually said, "Lucky you came in when you did. I was just about to close up for the day." They were able to print the correct physical and get it done. Situation avoided. As I left, I thought how great it would be to grab a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper and a Baconator for the road. The front door of the urgent care faced the street, and the back of the building faced a Walmart and a Wendy's. I swear to you good readers that Walmart simply did not exist before I willed it into being. I called my friend to relay this information, and together we solved the riddle of this place. Normal, Illinois is the remains of a gigantic alien mothership inhabited by people who definitely are human, but will do anything to fit into American Homo sapiens society, even read the minds of travelers and construct a real Walmart if need be. We had this conversation for a while. I can't remember how long, but the topics got pretty wild. They know so much about human medicine. After all, I had just been to a normal urgent care, right? Or did they do my physical to learn more about the human form? Who knows? Thank God that creepy experience is miles behind me. Nope. You see, the aliens from Normal, Illinois could read minds. That's how they made Walmart, after all. So they knew I had cracked the code, and they needed to off me. I was past Chicago and into the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, when my phone alerted me. Tornado watch, severe weather ahead. Apart from the ones that come from hurricanes, my part of Alabama doesn't really get tornadoes, so I did what I thought best. I asked a local for advice. I stopped by a Shell station and asked the attendant about what the deal was. This normal earthling walked outside and surveyed the sky. To the north, the direction I was heading, were green-black clouds, booming thunder, and humid wind. To the south, white clouds and patches of blue sky. He pointed out a particular set of clouds to the south that were circling each other, assuring me that the twister would form behind me. "Yeah, you're totally safe going north," he said. Being dumb, I believed him. The rain, the hail, the wind, it was terrifying. What got me most was the absolute density of the dark. Bumper to bumper, pulling off the interstate, I could not see the car 4 feet ahead of me, even with my brights on. I was on the phone with my mother, telling her that today I was going to die and that I needed her there to help me pass, assured, not scared, into whatever afterlife there may or may not be. My phone was a Galaxy Express 3. The eagle-eyed among you may note the words "was" and "express." The male micro USB socket was loose inside my phone. I could not charge it. "Mom, I see something big. A building, I think." Drive as close as you can and see if anyone's in there. It's a huge brick building, and there are people inside. Go in, go I. The pounding chaos of hail on the windshield and the sobs of a 20-year-old kid who couldn't tell his mother that he might live. It was a middle school. Several students crowded the halls as I ran to the front door, pelted by hail, soaked with rain and tears. An adult, the principal, walked up to me. "Hi, I'd like to register as a refugee of the storm." I was allowed to roam the halls like the teachers. We waited for what seemed like forever. After the all-clear was given, it became obvious that this school should not have been open. It was 6 p.m. on a Tuesday when I was let in. Turns out there had been a volleyball tournament that was supposed to take place, but it was canceled mid-game due to the tornado. A kind mother let me borrow her phone so I could check that the weather was safe from here to Duluth, where I would be camping. Another gave me instructions to a motel across the street I could stay at. Thanks, but I only had enough to get to where I was going and camp along the way. A third mother gave me the grim news that a tornado had completely destroyed a motorhome park 1 mile south of the school. I remember seeing that park as I called my mom. Even the gentleman at the motel gave me directions to the Walmart in Rice Lake. The guy at Walmart showed me the cheapest phone. The old lady behind me touched my shoulder, consoled me, and told me that the worst was over. The employee at the AT&T store walked me through setting up my new flip phone. The attendant at the gas station let me take a road map of Wisconsin for free. I leave you with this, dear reader, that school should not have been open. Because of that, I am alive. Was it the aliens who tried to off me, or the aliens who saved my life? Edit. The postscript. The aliens of Normal made an appearance when I was working there. A crew from Normal came through. On the road trip home, I passed through the village of Pound, Wisconsin, on my way to see my birth town of Marinette. After that, I passed a strip bar in Spread Eagle, Wisconsin. Both of these appearances I attribute to the aliens of Normal, Illinois. Next story. Perhaps not quite as cool as some of the pieces in here, but I suppose it's my version of a ghost story. I'm a choir lad, whose choir is fortunate enough to be invited to the Royal Albert Hall a few times each year. Usually, our dressing room is in the equivalent of the basement. It's not as fabulous as some of the big shots, but most of the boys invited are younger than 16 and always worried we'll break something. Very close to our dressing room is something called the Artist Bar. As the name suggests, it's a bar for performers. Drinks and snacks are sold at an extremely discounted price. For example, if I were to go upstairs to a public cafe, a sausage roll might cost around £4. At the Artist Bar, the same thing costs £1. Since I'm over the age of 18, I'm allowed to head to the Artist Bar if I want to buy food. We're regarded as responsible enough not to blow anything up or get trapped in a tuba. They're capable of making a well-brewed cup of tea. I still don't know what brand they use. I like to go there to make sure I don't fall asleep on stage. One of our tenors did that a few years back during a performance. The show was set to start at 1 p.m., and we had arrived early. It was 10:30 a.m., so we had plenty of time. Everyone tends to be last minute, so nobody was dressed yet. They likely wouldn't be until about 5 minutes before going on stage. I was wandering around in a shirt and jeans, caffeine deprived, so I decided to get a cup of tea. All the other chaps were in the dressing room, watched over by chaperones. It was just me heading to the Artist Bar. I remember the hall being frightfully quiet. That wasn't unexpected, but it was sort of chilly, and for some reason it made me tense. I turned into the room and noticed people who were obviously older than me wearing formal attire. It didn't interest me much because caffeine triumphed over anything else in my surroundings. I remember thinking I felt like I was walking into the Overlook Hotel. I expected Jack Torrance to greet me at any moment. I also remember one gentleman wearing a tuxedo with a white bow tie, which was strange because the orchestra commonly wears plain black, and the other choirs were doing the same. He was dressed as our conductor would be, but he wasn't the conductor. I shrugged and walked up to the counter, where two girls were stationed. What weirded me out more was the way they were sitting. There are 2 or so chairs on the left side of the bar, so whoever is on shift doesn't need to stand indefinitely. They're stationed against the left wall, so the servers aren't facing me, but I can see their faces. If I were a server, my customer would be forward, then slightly to the right. Both girls were sitting back against their chairs, legs on the floor, hands placed perfectly forward on their laps. A small smile rested on both their faces, but they were looking straight ahead, not at me, but at the opposite wall. They looked sort of like dolls, sitting in complete silence until I snapped out of my bemusement and coughed a little. Excuse me? One of the girls stood up. The way she moved was ridiculously robotic. She first stood, walked forward while still smiling, and then suddenly pivoted 90 degrees to face me in complete silence. Hi there. I was just hoping for some tea." Her smile widened, but when she spoke, her voice was monotone. I leaned back slightly, shocked. "Of course, sir. That will be £1." I handed her the coin, and as she turned to make the drink, I realized how quiet the room was. I looked around and noticed that the people from earlier were just staring at each other. No talking, just silently watching. Okay then. My drink was placed in front of me. Pouring boiling water into a tea bag isn't exactly difficult, so it didn't take long. I thanked the girl, who was now just staring at me, walked over to the counter, lid off, poured a little milk in, lid back on, and feeling so uncomfortable, tried to power walk out. I stepped into the hallway, about to turn back toward the dressing room, when I took a sip and my brain went, bloody hell, this needs sweetness. I was maybe 5 meters from the artist bar, facing away. The atmosphere felt so weird that I had a brief internal debate about going back. The hallway was silent. I would hear anyone walking down it. Finally, I decided, bugger it, I'll grab some sugar and leave. At best, a 15-second argument with my inner monologue. I turned, walked up to the doorway, and the room was dark as hell. The lights were off. I poked my head further in and turned on my phone flashlight. Nobody was at the counter. Nobody was at the tables. The room was completely empty. I hadn't heard anyone leave. There was no sign of anything. Unnerved beyond all else, I booked it. Somewhat gently, I wasn't going to spill this drink, no matter how spooked I felt, back to my room. As I walked in, a chaperone gave me a strange look. "Where'd you get the drink from? Did you go up to the cafe?" I was confused. No, I just headed to the artist bar. Cue her confusion. The artist bar isn't open until 12 today. The saddest part, I didn't even get to finish my drink because we were called up for rehearsal and cold tea is just forbidden. I've never had anything like that happen at the artist bar before. When I described the counter girls to one of the organizers at the event, I was given a weird look and told that nobody resembling them was or had been employed at the Albert Hall. Next story, I drove a small hatchback back in 1989, before seatbelts seemed mandatory. When I felt immortal, I was driving up the Atlantic coast, through Maine, when this happened. It was noon, the sun high overhead, dark forests lined either side of the lonely road. I hadn't seen another car in a while. After some time, I turned the radio off. There was something about the atmosphere that made me want only the quiet. I remember rolling down the window, cranking it with the spindle, and driving 50 down this lonesome road in mid-October. Winter's grasp tightened around each bend, the air growing colder and the trees shedding more of their leaves. In the dark wooded forests on either side, I thought I saw movement. At first, it was only quick glimpses, but it kept happening, always at the edge of my vision. Sometimes, I dared to look directly, but whenever I did, whatever it was remained perfectly still as the trees blurred past. The hum of my engine lulled me into quiet, leaving me unsure how unsettled I should actually feel. The forests of Maine can be dangerous, but the locals say only at night. They have their legends, though I've never been one for stories. Still, the sheer number of wild animals was enough to keep me wary. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and the road seemed endless. It had been about 5 hours since I began this journey, and still the road stretched on. I had passed only 2 cars in that time, both speeding well above the suggested limit. I say suggested because it was the 80s and everyone felt immortal. I was headed to my aunt's house. She had said I could stop along the way. Back then, I had grand plans, still daring and adventurous, lifted by the warm air of college, which carried me higher than I should have gone on such great wings. I was too confident, but that summer, I decided I would travel up the coast until I reached the very tip of the country, where all that remained was ocean. Foolish in hindsight, but my aunt supported me, offering shelter for the night. The car began sounding odd later in the day. I had expected the drive to take no longer than 6 hours, and by then I had driven 6 on the mark. The engine's sound shifted. The guttural glugging of gas was now accented by a metallic bouncing. A loose screw caught in a fan, or a failing part on its last legs. An internal game of pinball where, if the sound stopped, I knew I was finished. I don't remember much after that, only vague flashes through a haze of dehydration, hunger, and highway hypnosis. The road had worked its spell and was ready to swallow its next meal. The shuffled movements from the forests I mentioned earlier never truly left, only my awareness of them did. I regret not paying more attention now. It gives me chills to think of what it might have been. I remember pulling over, deciding I would sleep at hour 7, afraid I wouldn't make it out of the forest, night pressing in fast. I reclined my seat, first checking the mirrors front and back. The road stretched for miles in both directions, empty. I paused. I swore I saw a truck pass me, not 5 minutes earlier. An old man was driving. I remember that clearly. His face was so distinct. He leaned forward in his seat, neck craned toward the windshield like he was trying to get a good look at me as I passed. Maybe he was going faster than I thought. Maybe he took a bend 10 miles back and I lost sight of him. But doing the math now, he would have had to be driving at an ungodly speed. I lied to myself then. I was too drained from the day's driving, too eager for sleep, and too afraid of the truth. I remember the chill coming first. There was no sound, no crickets, no birds. The forest around me felt stripped of life, except for me. But the chill crept in anyway, curling slowly up my spine, leaving goosebumps across my legs and up the back of my neck as it climbed. It had been a bright and sunny day, but night had truly fallen. I was 8 hours into the drive now. This is when I got scared. I told myself it was just nerves. I told myself to grow up, but I was right to be scared. I had been right all day. The thing I saw moving in the forest had been following me, slowly seducing me into stopping, waiting for the moment I would be still. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, a beast of the night. I'm not religious, but I know what I saw. It was a demon. I saw red eyes glowing through the complete darkness. I heard the muffled thuds of massive hooves, and I smelled the rotting flesh of the damned. It crept slowly up to my car, my heart pounding harder with every step it took, the air growing colder the closer it came. I remember my window frosting over, only to clear for a moment with each breath I exhaled, then freeze again a second later. The car wouldn't start. I didn't need to try. I knew it in my bones. I was as good as dead. But from somewhere down the road, I heard the low thrumming of an engine. I glanced away from the thing, now 5 feet from my car, tall and still in the middle of the road, and looked into my rearview mirror. Headlights burst into view, flooding everything in sharp relief. When I looked back, the demon was gone. Only 2 smoldering half-moons were left, seared into the asphalt. I remember seeing them clearly when I finally stepped out of the car. The truck had pulled up behind me, and the driver got out to check if I was all right. Only then did I feel safe enough to open the door. That night marked the end of my youth, the end of my reckless bravery. But the man, the one who seemed to drive the demon away, had more to say. I cannot repeat his words. I swore an oath. But know this, What I've written is true. The beasts of the night are more real than they seem. Next story. Here's a story about Daggett. If you ever decide to do Route 66, I suggest starting in Chicago and heading west, just like the history books say. Starting the drive in Santa Monica might sound appealing, but you lose any of that California beach charm about 2 blocks from the ocean. From there, for about half the state, expect every 1-hour drive to take 3, and don't expect much to remind you that you're on the historic Route 66. Anyway, I started in Santa Monica. The hotel I stayed at, the Georgian, looks great from the outside, and sure, it's on Ocean Avenue, so the location's solid. But man, the staff there, pure California attitude, the kind that makes you feel like you're in the way, like you're occupying a room meant for someone more important. Long story short, save your money. Stay somewhere they won't treat you like a mistake. Around noon, I finally made it past the outer rim of Los Angeles and into the San Bernardino Valley. Now, I was on the Route 66 of my imaginings, 2 semi-maintained lanes, sparse traffic, sharp winding turns, and the constant sense that if you went missing out here, it'd take at least 2 days for anyone to find the body. The San Bernardino Valley isn't the least impressive valley I've seen. I was surrounded by squat mountains and endless desert scrub. Now and then, you're forced onto the interstate, but for the most part, it's a straight shot of Americana, the kind that points towards some glorious, deeply underwhelming destination on the horizon between 2 ridges. It was almost enough to make me carsick with patriotism. Driving out of Barstow, the route started to meander, and I got turned around more than once. When I finally found my bearings again, the road led me straight into what looked like a border crossing, complete with a lone cop hand at his hip. I slowed down and considered turning around, but a quick check of the map, my ultimate authority, higher even than cop, told me to keep going. Apparently, my 2 quick swerves raised suspicion. As I pulled up, he gave me the classic cop stare and a full scan of the vehicle, no doubt checking for giant bags of drugs that people in that business always seem to leave in plain sight. He leaned in a little. "What's your affiliation?" he asked. I gave him a Minnesota smile and said, "Oh, I'm just trying to follow Route 66. This, apparently, was not a reasonable statement. The cop informed me I was attempting to enter a Marine base and would need to turn around, but he didn't seem in a hurry to let me go. "What brings you out here?" he asked again. I told him. The map directed me that way, and that, as far as I could tell, I was currently on Route 66. This seemed to genuinely perplex him. When I said I was on a road trip, he narrowed his eyes. "What kind of trip?" he asked. "Road," I said. "With hot for that," cop replied. Yeah, I said, nailing the audition for sweaty, nervous civilian number 2. He asked for my ID and took the appropriately inappropriate amount of time running me through the system. By the time he came back, a line of cars had formed behind me. None of them looked especially affiliated either. He handed me back my ID. Just as I was about to drive off, he raised a hand. "One more thing," he said. "Whatever you do, don't stop in Daggett." I laughed. "Oh yeah. Why? What's in Daggett?" He made a face, one of those expressions that could have meant any number of things, but clearly fell into one of 2 categories. 1. The warning should have been enough. 2. The fact that one should not stop in Daggett was self-evident, the kind of truth made whole by merely saying the name. I nodded, pulled a U-turn, and got back on the interstate, deciding it was probably best to bypass the Marines in Daggett for now. "Look, I stopped in Daggett, okay?" At the next turnoff, I pulled back onto the route and saw a sign that read, "Welcome to Daggett" in reasonably friendly type. You actually had to take a few extra turns to get there, which made the cop's warning seem even more ridiculous. If anything, it felt like reverse psychology, like he wanted me to stop in Daggett. Right? So I took the turns and ended up on a road, maybe Daggett Road, though I can't say for sure. A lone man was walking down the street. He wore baggy blue jeans and bright red suspenders over a dirty, untucked white shirt. I'd been hoping to pick up a hitchhiker somewhere along the route, just for the story if nothing else. But suspenders, probably solid ligature material. And anyway, this guy didn't look like he needed a ride. He looked like a Daggett lifer, a man who had arrived and decided nowhere else was worth going. As someone from northern Minnesota who spent a decent chunk of time in southern Arizona, I like to think I have a pretty good feel for a real small town. You usually get a few trailers, maybe a couple of structures that might be houses if you squint. The kind where you look and think, yeah, someone could theoretically seek shelter there. But nothing had really prepared me for Daggett. Each block, or what passed for a block, looked like a collection of card houses put up by a 5-year-old with a vendetta against structural integrity. When one went down, he just moved over a bit and slapped together 2 more. You could tell people lived here. There was that unmistakable lived-in feel, an aura of human existence clinging to the dust. But other than the guy in red suspenders, I didn't see a soul. Still, I felt like I had to get to the bottom of Cop's warning. What made Daggett, of all towns, worthy of an official law enforcement level "don't stop" warning? I mean, how bad did it have to be? I was just rounding a corner near what looked like a general store or a building, trying very hard to suggest it once was, when I saw 2 small lanky men slink out of one of the shanties and into a rusted-out Chrysler. I didn't catch whether they were wearing red suspenders. I have to tell you, I instinctively locked my doors.
And I hate doing that. I almost never do. It feels so obviously superior, like you're broadcasting that you think the people around you are about to rob you just for breathing the same air. But I did it. Instinct overruled politics.
I idled for another half block, watching the Chrysler in my rear view. Then, quite suddenly, I decided maybe I didn't need to understand Cop's warning after all. There was just something Daggett-y about the whole thing, hard to define, easy to feel. Abandoning every last one of my let's see the real world and have adventures instincts, I turned my Honda around and noped right out of Daggett. Next story. Summer of 2012. My best friend from college, his little brother, and I decided to tackle the Transamerica Trail together, a well-known bicycle route stretching from Yorktown, Virginia to Astoria, Oregon. I'm from Minnesota, they're from Texas. At the time, we lived in those respective places. We planned to fly to Yorktown and start the trip together. Unfortunately, about 3 weeks before the trip, I was hit by a car while riding my bike. My departure was delayed, so I decided to start from Minnesota on my own and meet them later in Pueblo, Colorado. They stuck to the original plan. That's how it played out. We camped about half the time, stayed with designated hosts through an organization called Warm Showers, basically couch surfing for touring cyclists about 40% of the time, and spent the rest of the nights in churches. One of the best parts of the trip was figuring out where to sleep every day. From the start, we made it a point never to pay for shelter or campsites. What began as a principle turned into a point of pride by the end. It led to some of our most memorable experiences and some pretty cool places to sleep. I have more than one story to share from this trip, but here's one about a strange Warm Showers experience. To stick to our goal of never paying for lodging, we sometimes bent the rules, minor infractions, nothing harmful. We were always as respectful as possible. The only time we ever paid for a campsite was in Yellowstone. We liked churches for their safety and their eerie vibe. They usually had showers and kitchens, which made them ideal. Over the trip, we stayed at 7 churches in total, some official hosts, 1 we camped outside, and 3 we entered somewhat surreptitiously. This wasn't hard to do, because much of the route was rural. These churches often had an easy-to-find, unlocked door. The most memorable was the Episcopal Chapel of the Transfiguration in Teton National Park. This next story is about one church in rural Missouri. I know the town's name but won't reveal it, mostly to protect both ourselves and the church from any unintended trouble. My 2 buddies were in this town when a thunderstorm started brewing. Missouri storms can get pretty intense, so they decided to call it an early night. While scouting for shelter, they found a church tucked well off the beaten path. It seemed quiet and safe, so they wandered around the area for a bit. Later, feeling comfortable enough, they went back inside. The storm was picking up outside. The church wasn't air-conditioned, and for those who don't know, Missouri in early July can get hot and humid. They decided to look for a fan to cool the place down. Searching closets and storage areas, everything seemed pretty ordinary. until Will noticed something. To the right of the fridge in the kitchen was a narrow, open space about 24 inches wide, stuffed with brooms. Behind them was a door. He figured it was just another closet. They pulled out the brooms and opened the door. Will said that the moment he opened it, he had an immediate feeling they'd found something not meant to be discovered. The door revealed a staircase leading down into the basement. The weird thing about the door was how narrow it was. You had to turn sideways just to get through comfortably. The stairs beyond looked normal, as if part of the original design. Someone must have altered the door later to make it more discreet. They hung back for a while, wanting to be sure no one would come by the church that night. After a while, curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to explore. The basement had an uncanny atmosphere, like a movie set from the 70s. Everything was child-sized. Small desks pushed into corners, a short drinking fountain. Despite layers of dust, everything was surprisingly well preserved, but something about it felt off. Then they found the room that made their skin crawl. It was lab-like, spotlessly clean, and clearly in use. They flicked on the fluorescent lights. Long stainless steel tables stretched down the center of the room, each lined with troughs filled with a thick, dark substance, almost like tar. Fear hit them immediately. They felt exposed and vulnerable, trapped in this strange, unsettling place. Outside, it was pitch black and raining hard, so they couldn't leave. They made sure to leave everything as undisturbed as possible. They slipped away about 30 minutes before sunrise. We have plenty of stories from this trip, but this one is the one we tell most often. We've checked the news from that town regularly, hoping for any busts or raids. Nothing yet. Next story. I have two. First one, I was driving back from Atlanta to Austin in a GMC Sierra Denali Ultimate Company issued since I worked for GM at the time. I don't remember exactly where on I-20 this happened, but I remember watching one car slam into another and then flip. It was in a stretch between two exits, at least 10 miles apart. I came to a full stop on the interstate. For about 5 minutes, I checked on the drivers involved, asking if everyone was okay. They said they were. No one was seriously hurt, so I got back in the truck and continued on. As I settled back into the seat, I glanced at the gas gauge, 3/4 full. Good, I thought. That'll get me out of this stretch at least. At the time, I didn't think about the fact that I had already driven at least 200 miles since leaving Atlanta. I assumed the gauge was accurate. In my defense, it was only my second long trip in the truck. I'd driven it over to Atlanta in the first place, and it still had under 1,000 miles on it. I was used to filling it constantly, but that was in city traffic, not on the highway. As I continued down I-20, a loud ringing sound suddenly cut through the cabin, followed by a message on the DIC, low fuel. Crap! The range had just dropped from 250 miles to low in seconds. Doing the math, I realized I was about 430 miles from Atlanta. That explained a lot. I figured the heat must be screwing with the fuel gauge. Shortly after the warning, I saw an exit with one lone location listed under both gas and food. With no real choice, I pulled off to refuel. I rolled up to what was basically a trailer with an ancient gas pump, one of those old mechanical ones with physical numbers. Inside, I was greeted with a cold stare from the man behind the counter. Our conversation went like this. Tuition, hi there. I'd like to put $60 on the pump, please, I said, holding out my company card. We don't take Amex, he muttered quietly. Oh, okay. Here's a Visa then, I said, offering another card. We don't take Visa, he replied, looking increasingly annoyed. MasterCard? Discover. I've got those too. No, we don't take cards. Okay, I don't have cash. Is there an ATM nearby? Maybe you want to go check in town. Town? Where's the town? I don't see any signs. You're already in it. At this point, I was creeped out, but I played along. Oh, okay, so where would I find the ATM? We don't have one. He laughed oddly hard. I started thinking he had to be messing with me. There was no way this guy was serious. But tired of the game and needing gas, I decided to roll the dice. Haha, good one. Let me check if I have any change floating around in the truck. I went back to the truck and tried to start it. Nothing. Completely out of gas. Lovely. I started digging through the truck, shaking every corner and crevice. I found about 43 cents in loose change. Back inside the shop, I held up the coins. This is going to sound crazy, but I have 43 cents. Any chance you could lend me a few gallons so I can get to an ATM? I'm happy to leave my ID with you as a promise I'll come back. The guy just stared at me and said, "No, but I'm willing to exchange services with you." Stupidly, I asked, "Services? What do you mean?" He sat there, blank-faced for about 10 seconds, then said, "You know what I'm talking about, boy." At that point, I was like, nope, screw that. I left immediately and headed back to the truck. As I climbed in, I noticed I was parked on an incline, which made me wonder if the gas level was just too low to start the engine in that position. I put the truck in neutral, rolled down the hill in the parking lot, basically tipping the rear end higher than the engine. I tried starting it again, and thankfully, that did the trick. The next gas station was 6 miles away. I drove there with the lightest acceleration possible, holding exactly 55 miles per hour. When I pulled up, my truck died again. Thankfully, the pumps were digital and took cards. To this day, I still don't remember where that station was. I've looked for it every time I've driven between Atlanta and Austin, about 10 trips, and never found it again. For perspective, I'm a white male, 6'2", a bit on the heavy side. The clerk, roughly twice my size, and also male. Second story. About 10 years ago, I was driving down to Atlanta with an ex on a small trip. We needed to stop for gas, but I didn't know the area well. We pulled off thinking we were in Buckhead, a nice part of town, or so I thought. Turns out we were in Bankhead. Everything looked burnt out, falling apart, or just destroyed. The ex had no idea she'd actually printed directions for Bankhead, not Buckhead. As I pulled up to the pump, an older man approached and asked, "You looking for something?" "No, just getting gas," I replied. He stared at me and said, "Can I have $1?" I told him, "I have no cash, sorry." Without missing a beat, he said, "You're in the wrong part of town, boy." Okay, creepy homeless dude. Thanks for the heads up. I went inside the station to get directions, thinking maybe the guy was just off. The clerk looked at me and asked, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Just trying to get directions." He immediately shot back, "Well, turn around the way you came and get the F off, white boy." Yeah, that was my experience with Bankhead. Aside from a recent drive-through to deliver wedding invitations, I haven't been back in 10 years. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.